I will start recording topic 6, and this is a short lecture to complete my lecture series of the course corresponding to the course 2020-2021. Sorry about the lack in the dates. I could not adapt everything on time. Basically, this last lecture will focus on globalization and inequalities. I want to outline the trends of inequalities in the world, so to speak, and I want to highlight three types of mechanisms that seem to impinge on inequalities currently. My main point is that these mechanisms are operating at variable geographical scales, and I propose you to think of their influence at the local, national, and global levels. In order to summarize or to finish this initial summary, let me briefly mention the three mechanisms. They are exploitation, which basically draws on the neo-Marxist tradition of sociological theory; opportunity hoarding, which approximately draws on the Bavarian tradition of sociological theory; and misrecognition of identity, which approximately derives from symbolic interactionism and quantitative approaches to research. The first thing I want to introduce the topic with a very rapid outline of the historical trends of global inequalities. This slide basically summarize some of the points that we will see in the readings and we will discuss in the seminars. So I will not get into the details, but let me simply highlight. I think that you can get the most out of the message by simply reading these lines, but let me briefly highlight what the constant flux of social mobility is, because probably it's not obvious to all of you. Social mobility consists of climbing the social ladder. It means being born in a given social class and finishing in another one. That was that functionally sociologists expected, that modern societies would become extremely mobile, to the extent that the social origin would not condition social destination. The social class of parents would not decide the social class of people. John Goldthorpe and some associates developed a method to measure the social mobility that is normally labeled as social fluidity. What do? They calculate the probability that a person born in a given social class jumps to another one. So they calculate, they map out all the positions of people according to their parents and all the positions of people according to themselves. And they have a table and they calculate all the possible leaps in this table, how people jump from one to another, the probability to jump. They could extend this analysis to a variety of Western, Latin American and Eastern European countries for most of the 20th century. And what did they find? They found a constant flux. So they found that the probabilities did not significantly change. There were changes in different epochs, but the trend was not clearly towards greater or higher mobility as functionalist sociologists like Talcott Parsons had expected. So that's an important point. although industrial industrial society and post-industrial societies became a reality in many countries during the 20th century, and also education expanded significantly, social mobility did not significantly change. That's important in order to complete the picture. Okay, let me briefly tell you about the three mechanisms. In each slide, I want to summarize many theories. So I brought them so that you can read them. It's not. I don't want. I am not going to elaborate a lot on that because I think that these summaries are clear enough. Basically, what do we mean by exploitation? By exploitation, we mean that somebody is able to get the benefit or the outcome of somebody else's work. That was one of the assumptions of Karl Marx's theory of the surplus value. Here you have another set of mechanisms. John Elster intends another approach, another set of approaches to the same idea. John Elster tried to define how exploitation occurred within the market. Saskia Sassen posited a very interesting analysis looking at finance and how finance allowed some institutions or some capitalists to size the value of other people, not only labor, not only derived from labor, also regarding housing and other aspects. And finally, this is a summary. You have a summary of the very popular thesis of economist Thomas Piketty, who basically also looks at the capacity of financial institutions and very extremely wealthy individuals to get the value of many other economic activities. Opportunity hoarding summarizes another set of mechanisms which basically have to do with political access to resources, to creating a monopoly of resources. For instance, economist Joseph Stiglitz mentions low taxes or benefits or tax allowances or even subsidies to corporations as examples of this kind of hoarding, of this kind of monopolizing resources. In Latin America, the poverty production approach also developed a theory of that, highlighting a series of mechanisms such as regressive taxation, tolerance of labor informality, and punitive urban management, focusing policing in the poorest neighborhoods. So it's ways of monopolizing resources or excluding some people from some resources. Finally, the misrecognition of identity has to do with symbolic domination, which basically compels people to identify, to accept some kind of identity, some kind of symbolic classification, some kind of attributes. I think these three authors, Erving Goffman, Pierre Bourdieu, and Nancy Fraser, roughly represent this, or have argued for this mechanism. Basil Bernstein and Robert Castell applied this very similar mechanism, or developed a very similar theories in order to analyze education and social policies, by looking at how these policies imposed an identity to some specific groups of people. So I propose you to think of these theories through this lens. If you don't know these theories, don't worry. I don't mean that you have to know about everything. I just try to suggest some approaches that can be relevant for you. Finally, welfare innovation such as conditional cash transfers, the Revenu de Solidarité Active in France, has for in Germany, or TAMF in the US, are more or less doing something similar to what Bernstein and Castell theorized for education and social policies. For instance, by the way, TAMF is temporary aid for needy families. Well, here we come to my final point. We have to think of pluriscalar concatenations of mechanisms. Normally, these three types of mechanisms contribute to define different types of class, gender, and ethnic differences throughout the world. And I propose that we do our best to spell out how exploitation, opportunity hoarding, and the misrecognition of identity operate at the global, national, and local scales. That's what we will be doing when we discuss the reading list. So you needn't get into the details now. Here you have simply a kind of conceptual map outlining an array of theories that, in my understanding, precisely do that. They try to look at the mechanisms and the different scales. So thank you very much for your attention. This is a rough summary, but I expect it's a helpful introduction to the further discussion of the pieces of the articles that I selected for this topic. Let's go on with other activities of this course.